Ready when you are, yeah. So, thanks for coming. It's the last day of my show, Kooragang Island. So, for those of you that aren't familiar, Kooragang Island is a small island just outside of Newcastle, sort of in the Hexham area, and it has an interesting past. It's had its traditional owners for many years, and then when the colonisers came, they had botanists out there because of the diverse flora and fauna, and then they started a little community out there, but because it's a wetlands, they're getting flooded. So when you go out there now, the National Parks Office is the old schoolhouse. And you still have remnants of that out there. And then in World War II, it was a base. There's a radar base out there and a few other things. Then industry moved in, and then that left, and now it's being regenerated. So maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started photographing out there just out of it was maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes from my studio, and sort of whenever I was overworking, I'd just go out there and take photos. And I didn't really have a project in mind. It was sort of just a place that I could get out of the city. It's only 25 minutes, but as soon as you cross the bridge over the island, it feels like you're sort of in the middle of nowhere, which is lovely. So yeah, I've been shooting it for years. When I first started shooting out there, most of the photos were of burnt out cars and the place being quite grotty. But I've noticed sort of the wildlife coming back, and sort of pot of kangaroos out there the last time I was out there. So yeah, then eventually having all this sort of stack of negatives that I wasn't doing anything with, I had an idea for a project. So I was literally looking at my contact sheets and the red marks on the contact sheets and thinking about the mark that we've left on this environment, both negative and positive out there. So then I started playing around with not just circling or cropping in on my contact sheet, but actually putting lines through parts of the composition where I could see lines that would draw your eye. And then, explored that in the darkroom and in the studio, making bigger prints and doing more lines, and then I incorporated something I do in all my work, which is the hand colouring. So they're all black and white silver gelatin prints. Yeah, so they're all...
You called it.
Yeah.
It's a black and white image.
Exactly, yeah. So then I started incorporating that. So it's using the Marshall's oil paint. So it's a traditional way of hand colouring photographs. So if you see photos from maybe 70, 80 plus years ago, usually portraits with big rosy cheeks and red lips, it's the exact same paint. I just used a lot more of it. And then looking at that, and I've always been really interested in the idea of materiality in photography, and making the work something more than just an image, trying to push it into the world of sculpture and painting, and taking ideas borrowing ideas from them about materiality and how meaning can be derived from the material as much as the image. So once I had these ideas where I could, I've marked it with the paint and I've painted on other prints, and then I started mounting them to board and extending that mark making and that materiality out, I started to really feel like there was a body of work forming. And then even with the framing, trying to take that idea of materiality and referencing the industry, the past industry that's out there. And then I felt that it really sort of came together in a way that worked visually, it worked conceptually, and I actually enjoyed the process. So it's just as important. There's a lot of things I start that are great conceptually, but I just get bogged down over the process and never finishing the project. Are there any questions or anything before I keep just sort of yapping on? Is there anything that you guys have wondered about or anything?
Yeah, so you said this is a black and white image that you painted over on, right?
Yes.
So you painted all these fine details, or how does it?
Yes and no. Because it's oil paint, it takes, with the thinness of mine, it takes about 24 hours to dry. So it's sort of this back and forth and then toing and froing of colouring and then removing the colour and colouring and removing the colour. So I don't know if you've ever done any sort of charcoal drawing or any drawing, but you get those erasers that are sort of malleable and squishy. If you use them, you can actually, when it's still wet, remove the paint. So it's sort of, I work quite gesturally with it. And so you put on, say to get the blue for this section, maybe a dot of paint the size of my pinky nail, and then I either use cotton buds or rags and things, and you spread that out, and that's the traditional way of doing it. And then if you do go over the line of something, you erase it. But then I sort of go back and forth to get the details where I'll put in the blue and it'll go over the line, so then I erase the blue, and then put in the green and it'll go over, and like come back and forth until there's a balance. Because if you look closely, none of it is picture perfect, and that's on purpose. Because it is this sort of balance of trying to get it. If I had to be very meticulous and paint every single leaf, I probably wouldn't do the process.
So good.
Yeah. So I really like that idea of the hand of the artist, like the mark of the artist. I don't know the words. The mark of the artist's hand, so that each work is individual and unique and can't be reproduced. So there is that sort of looseness and gesturalness to it.
So are they gelatin or digital?
Gelatin, yeah. They're all fibre-based silver gelatin prints. I've tried to colour digital prints, but the paper doesn't take the paint as well. Because this has that coating of gelatin on it, it's even though it's matte, it's still quite smooth, and the paint does spread across quite easily. When I've done it on digital prints before, it's like if I put a bit of paint on and spread it out, that's it, you get that one mark, and you've got to keep doing one mark so it wasn't the look I was sort of going for. But it also has to be the matte fibre-based painting colour, because anything with any gloss or even semi-gloss, it just sort of slips right off the top.
Keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, then as I was sort of working, the lines that I was finding in the landscape started to create these crosses unintentionally, but then once I sort of noticed it, I lent into that sort of, marks on a map and things like that. So the X marks the spot sort of idea, but then also the sort of like, is it a positive mark or a negative mark with this cross? The red did come from the contact sheet, but then it sort of had this sort of visceral blood sort of idea that, all these sort of unintentional ideas that only occur through the process and through working in the studio. And it's nice to have a photographic process or the photographic practice that allows me this time in the studio to work as a studio-based artist and develop these ideas over time rather than in the field when you're taking photos. And it was, this was sort of a body of work that gave me this break into these sort of larger scale painted works that blur the line between photography and painting. And I've found that when discussing them and also when trying to enter them into exhibitions and art prizes and that sort of thing, sometimes, photography prizes will knock them back because there's too much painting. And then sometimes painting prizes will knock them back because there's a photo in it. But I've had more luck with painting prizes than photography prizes and exhibitions too. But not just this bodywork, but the stuff that's developed since making this style of work. Because all my work now is sort of leaning into this same production model with no glass, mounting it onto board and producing these sort of bigger paintings with the photographs as well. It's hard to I've had it called collage before, and technically it is, but I don't know, there's something dirty about that word.
Crafty.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm still sort of trying to figure out how to define it, which is a nice place to be in too. Hopefully that's a good place rather than a bad place. So you're going to be undefinable for so long.
So good.
Have you shown it locally?
This was the first
Okay.
vision of this, yeah. And I kind of work in a way like I'm so obsessive in my making that, you know, I've already started ideas for the next body of work, and I'll probably make that and show that next, and this will, a few things will go in group shows and prizes and that sort of thing, and sell off, but more than likely this will be its final show together. Yeah, I can't linger on ideas for too long. I kind of have to keep making. I get very grumpy if I'm not in the studio making.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I missed this at the start,
That's
but
right.
what's the sort of history of that island really? Like,
So
is there much known about it? Or?
yeah, no. There's a large written history about it because initially it was a place for scientific research. So the history there is actually well documented. The traditional owning history is obviously not as well written, but I know that it was a place for getting food. It's a wetland, so there was a lot of abundance of food and animals and things like that there. But the history that is written that I could research myself was, botanists were there, small community with a school, then there was a World War II base, then industry, and then now bush regeneration there.
So water like sort of polluted or?
I wouldn't swim in it.
Yeah.
It looks a lot nicer when I colour it this
It's
blue.
sin.
Well, it's more like industrial pollution, because although there's the section of the island that you can now visit freely and it's a national park, there's still surrounding it is a lot of industry. As Newcastle is sort of an industrial town, there is.
Yeah, I've got family there, but I've actually never heard of this place. Where is it?
Just outside of Hexham. So if you're heading sort of toward, leaving Newcastle and going towards Maitland,
Yes.
on the way, not quite halfway, sort of closer to Newcastle. You would miss the turn off if you weren't told about it. There's no real signage. It's you're driving along at 80 k's an hour and there's a random right-hand turn that you sort of have to just go, I wonder what's down there to.
And you called it an island.
It is an
How
island.
do you get out there?
There's a bridge.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. So you cross. So when you take this right-hand turn, you go to a bridge, and it's just a one-car width bridge. And then once you cross the bridge, it's a national park. But there's a lot of people out there that like there's areas for picnics. People fish out there. I don't. Hopefully, I don't eat the fish. And there's like they've put in walks through all the mangroves and stuff too. They're impossible in summer because there's one time I went there and there was mosquitoes are bad, but the trees are probably not like the mangroves probably like this close either side of you, and on this strip that was probably as long as this gallery, probably 15 to 20 spiderwebs across the walk, and they're the big ones with the yellow and black stripy legs, and I thought no, I'm good today.
You didn't photograph them?
No, I'm not big with spiders, so that was But it's a big place. Like it would take you, like if you were driving around it, 20 minutes to sort of drive around. It'd take you all day to walk around the accessible areas, and some of the areas like you could walk probably, but it's really like four-wheel drive accessible only. So yeah, it's a place that I was obsessed with, and I'm just so. It just felt so nice to finally get a body of work out that did something with it, because I'd sort of half worked on so many ideas, and then I even had we even made me and a friend made a zine out there where he did the writing and I did the photos, but then lockdown happened and it's now in a drawer at home and 50 copies that never went anywhere. Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting place. And then, so over with the videos as well, if we'll move it here, something I haven't mentioned yet. So the sound is field recordings of me walking around out there and sitting out there and sort of taking in the colours and the sounds and the feels and the smells. And in that I started taking videos, and initially they were to be sort of reference videos when I'm working in the studio to get colour palette ideas and things like that, and still feel that energy of the place while I'm making the work. But then I wanted to create these sculptures to project the videos on, then to reference that history of industry out there, juxtaposed with the sort of beauty of the landscape at the moment. This is one of my favourite spots, a sort of intermittent wet area. There's sometimes absolutely no water there, and then other times it's absolutely full. And that's a spot that I would sit quite often and photograph that tree there. God, 20, 30 times. That sort of stump that's sticking out of the water there. It's funny that actually I don't think it made, oh no, it didn't make the cut that far. But the video did. And that was sort of my first, this is my first exploration of projecting onto sculptures. And I kind of like how they hold the space.
So how do you make those sculptures then?
Pardon?
How do you make those?
So they're made of concrete and steel. So I've poured a black dye into the concrete and then shaped the concrete on bits of plywood so that the bit that's on the plywood has a flat surface. That's what I then painted white to be the screen for the video. And in the back there's 2 bars of Rio that work as the legs to keep it standing. And again, tying back into that idea about materiality and using the material as a conduit for some of the concepts, so it's not just the images. So yeah, it was a fun project to work on this one.
Can you tell us a bit more about the hand colouring?
Okay, yeah.
Like, is it difficult?
It's not.
Does that use a lot of paint?
No, it uses a very, very small amount of paint, but it's not labour intensive or difficult in that sense. I think the biggest difficulty for it is actually mixing the colours so that they're not sort of kitsch and garish and over the top, because the palette you get isn't huge for these colours. And I've actually been talking to friends that mix paint themselves to try and figure out how to do it in a way that it's not going to rot the paper, because if you use too much oil, it'll soak through and eventually rot the paper.
So you mix your own colours then? Is that what you're saying?
So yeah, I use the Marshall paints that are available to me, and you mix them together to get the right palette for the work. Because also the Australian landscape has quite a sort of muted greens. The blues are quite nice and vibrant, but the greens are quite muted, and usually there's a lot of brown and reds and stuff like that. Things that I never actually noticed until I really had to spend a lot of time looking at it to mix these colours. So yeah, you see the very small amount of paint and then thin it out. So rather than it blocking the photographs, you really want it to just stain the white areas. And actually a good point about that is that when you print the works too, you have to print them with quite a high contrast. Because if you have a print that you've made, correctly, with a wide tonal range, once you add the paint, they get quite sort of flat looking. Whereas if you have an image, like if you saw these before I painted them, they would look like misprints. They're very, very high contrast. But once you add the colouring, it brings it back to looking like a misprint.
So you're basically rubbing it in?
So you put a tiny little dot and then you spread it
Yeah.
with cotton or with, I started using microfiber cloths because I found that I was throwing out, 30, 40 cotton buds per work. It felt a bit wasteful. But you can get, microfiber cloth will last 5 or 6 works before it's completely full of paint and dry and stiff and doesn't spread the paint anymore. But yeah, so something like that, it's probably like an hour's working time to get the colour on. It's not too bad at all. I have done bigger ones recently that are about like this tall and this wide, and they're a couple hours working time. But it's one of those ones, because you don't want the paint to dry, you sort of have to work in a quick speed. Because although it takes 24 hours to dry completely, you probably only have a couple hours before it's sort of half dry, and then well, it's not really, it's never tacky because it's so thin. But when you're working it, you want to be able to erase bits, and you probably only have a couple hours before it's fully stained the paper, and you can only sort of semi-erase it. And I actually noticed there are certain colours, yellows and browns, that will remove any other colour. But then you can never put anything back over the top of them. So there are certain colours that I try and avoid. Yeah.
And the framing, which from a distance looks like tinfoil, but I'm sure it's not.
It almost is. It's aluminium.
Is it?
Yeah. So it's an industrial material. It's the flashing you use when you're installing a chimney. So once you cut the hole, you mold that around the hole. And the reason I use that is that it's thin enough to be malleable, but thick enough that it's not tinfoil. It doesn't rip. It has a strength to it. And what I like about that is that it will age with the work. With little bumps, that one's probably the wrong one to use, but it does move and sort of dent and mark, but not in a way that looks bad, in a way that sort of adds to that industrial material. And I like the fact that it's going to age with the work and sort of change over time. And the other thing too, that reflection around the works was something that where I make them in the studio, that doesn't happen. But then I have a wall that I use to photograph the works, and when I put it on that wall, the way the light hit it, I noticed that reflection. And initially I was trying to get the edges to be as smooth as possible, but then once I noticed it created that sort of glow. Some people call it like a mane or a fringe or something like that. I really liked how that works. I leant into that and was actually hitting the edges with a hammer so that it would ripple more. And it was a nice break from trying to be quite precious with it. And I could sort of just mould it and mark it and bend it and dent it so that produces that. So everywhere I've shown it that has these spotlighting, it gets this lovely glow. And you get it on this one too, this sort of along the top up here. Any more questions? I think I've sort of exhausted the things I can talk about with it, really, that I can think of. It was quite a slow process to make these, but I mean the ideas that I was exploring run across the whole body of work rather than have each work individually sort of containing its own ideas. So I mean, when I talk in these sort of generalities, it's about all the work, not one individual work. So yeah. So yeah, thank you.